welcome to my podcast. Today I am honored to have one of the well-known personalities in the MMA world. He's a well-known referee on many of your screens, Mr. Marc Goddard. Nice to see you. It's not the first time you're here in Abu Dhabi. Tell us why you're here first.
Yeah, well, firstly, hi, thanks for the welcome. And I'm back in the region because last night we had the Abu Dhabi Warriors show, obviously in Abu Dhabi, so here I am.
And, we're going to talk a lot about, UAE Warriors and many of the other organizations in the region that, you helped start, really, because one of the main things in any organization is having proper officiating, especially for a sport like MMA, which requires, this expertise. Many people ask me, what is Marc Goddard's background in martial arts? I know that I was surprised actually to see, the Gracie Baja logo on a lot of your posts on Instagram and stuff. So I could say that you're a Gracie Baja guy, you're a Jiu-Jitsu guy, but is that your first foray into the martial arts world?
No. I've been around martial arts for a good portion of my life, thankfully. MMA, exclusively MMA, for the last 20 years. Before that, when I got back into martial arts, it was I started back with Jiu-Jitsu, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, traditional Jiu-Jitsu. This is before MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came to the UK en masse. And then that was my first taste of the grappling arts, doing traditional Jiu-Jitsu, and that was just before the turn of the millennium. And things just started to move on and grow for me, and then I started doing some local grappling comps, very small back in the UK then, traditional Jiu-Jitsu comps, morphing into grappling comps, and then of course MMA was just starting to kick off in Europe and starting to kick off in the UK, and I was fortunate enough to, excuse me if I sound a bit bummed up, because I think I've contracted something.
That's normal. I mean, you have we're talking about this, you have quick turnarounds coming here and then leaving the day after, and you do that almost with every country you visit, so it's a testament to your ability to do all this traveling and endurance.
Yeah, on a personal front, having been around, like I said, MMA for 20 years and martial arts much longer still, having been there, competed in many disciplines and fought amateur and professional and coached and wrestled Jiu-Jitsu. I'm fortunate we were talking about it in the car on the way here, how fortunate we were for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UK. We had Braulio Estima come to Birmingham, I'm going to say 17 years ago. And we had obviously Hodger in London as well. So who's to me the greatest of all time. And Braulio was also one of the greatest of all time. So we were extremely fortunate for the growth of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in itself in the UK. And I still train. I'm still, I'm a Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Braulio. I do wear the Gracie Baja. You tell me off if I don't. But I've been fortunate. I have many people from many schools and affiliations, and you'll see the social media posts that you talk about. Because when I'm in the UK, I do still teach occasionally. What's that? More than occasionally. I don't teach fighters anymore. I stopped that a long time ago, but I'll still teach. It's a Gracie Bar. It's my friend's gym. So shout out to GB Halzoin, my good friend Stuart Gwilt, and I will always train for the rest of my days, or as long as I'm able to. That'll never stop.
Are you a no-gi guy or a gi guy?
I mean, obviously from more years ago, it was primarily no-gi, because obviously it complemented, coming from wrestling as well, from wrestling in MMA, it was mostly no-gi. But having started back with traditional jiu-jitsu, that was, fundamentally a gi art. I do like the gi. I'll still roll in the gi probably once a week minimum, just to keep the hand in, because I like the complexity of it. And it's puzzling. When you got a guy at 60 kilos hanging off you, it's hard to get him off. I do like the complexity of the gi, but primarily, push comes to shove, I'm a no gi guy.
And you mentioned, I'm gonna take this opportunity to ask you this question because I'm very interested in history and when it comes to traditional jiu-jitsu versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Kosen judo, all that stuff. But it seems to me, because I had another person from the UK, Tam Khan, in my previous episode, and he also mentioned that he started doing traditional jiu-jitsu. It seems like it was a thing back then in the UK. So how was the transition from traditional jiu-jitsu to Brazilian jiu-jitsu in terms of, like, is it a completely different martial art to you at the time, or did you feel like, whoa, this is like, it can't be transmitted? The reason I ask you this is because the UAE has now tag teamed with the people who are behind the Jiu-Jitsu International Federation, which consider traditional jiu-jitsu as part of their core.
Yeah.
And then Niwaza, which is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, as a curriculum, as part of the evolution of the sport. So can you tell me more about that, since you trained in that discipline?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that fundamentally the difference is I was training in it was an organisation called TJK, Taijutsu Kai, Rossi and Akaro. It was great, it was fantastic. Like I said, that was before MMA and BJJ really kicked off in the UK. I considered myself as a grappler, but then I went to it was around about 2000. I'm going to say 2002, maybe 2003, when I first went to Gracie Barra, and I got my ass kicked. That's the bottom line. Thinking I was already fighting MMA back then, winning grappling comps, and thinking I can wrestle. I know this, I know that. I'm going to go and see what this BJJ is all about. And I got like I said, I got my ass kicked, and it woke me up like many other people. And then lo and behold, the rest is history. I never look back. And like I said, you can't understate the importance of BJJ, Britain's contribution to BJJ, particularly in Europe. And now, it's just the growth of the sport's just been phenomenal. But yeah, I was very thankful for my traditional upbringing. This is what I was fortunate enough to, again, and I'm not saying that BJJ doesn't have it. MMA, by and large, certainly doesn't have it. It's the respect thing. The etiquette. If you come from a traditional background, judo, karate, jiu-jitsu, etc., it is very much. When you walk into the dojo, you are bowing on and off the mat. You ask for permission to do anything. You are sitting in silence, etc. And I'll always be thankful for that. It's kind of like when you talk to people about, you listen to your grandparents talk about, you kids, you don't know you were born today because things were more strict back then. That's the thing that I look up to and remember most fondly. The respect I had for my sensei. I still see him now. And I look back on that fondly.
And going into refereeing, how was it? Because the UK MMA scene, as I know, back in the day was still growing.
Yeah.
The cage rage era, or even before that with the Lee Hasdalls and all the other legendary figures, Ian Freeman. How was the UK MMA scene helping you in terms of refereeing? Because there weren't many shows, I'm guessing, where you could learn on the job, right? So how did it work out with you?
Well, that's exactly what happened. I learned, because my journey into refereeing was completely by accident, and I believe in fate. And I think the best things are already written for you. And I went to this 2004. It was my friends. who owned the gym where Braulio taught in, where GB was, Stevie B's in Birmingham. He had an event, and I was supposed to fight on the event, but I got injured in the lead up, so I couldn't compete. But of course, we went to the event. Something happened to one of the other referees. He didn't turn up or couldn't make it, and Stevie kind of, I'm going to say he asked me, but he more told me. He said, "Mark, will you referee?" And I was like, "What? Well, right, okay." And I done it, and it just kind of took over. And I remember it was good because obviously the fighters at the time, they had a lot of respect and understanding because it was a very small community, and we all knew one another. So it was unheard of having. I was kind of like the first guy of being an active fighter to start refereeing, and it worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me, and that was my journey into refereeing, completely by accident, wasn't planned, and the rest is history.
But you still had a background in martial arts before you got into refereeing. Many other sports, you don't have to be an actual, I would say, professional practitioner, or maybe even a practitioner, like in football, for instance, many referees were not famous football players, or even didn't play football at the high level. They were just playing on the streets.
Recreational.
Yes, exactly. So with MMA, can that be possible? Can someone who is a fan of the sport, can he become a referee one day?
I think you're going to struggle. Here's the thing. People talk about, do you have to be a former fighter to be an official? No, absolutely not. That doesn't translate. I think I was, I had success. I was okay as a fighter, good as grappling, and I won more fights than I lost. It stood me in good stead. I would never swap my upbringing or my history for anything. And like I said, my journey into refereeing was by accident, so I didn't know that I possessed the qualities to be a referee. There are some fighters out there, ex-fighters who you would not want to referee you. I'm not going to name them.
Somebody pops into my head right away.
Yeah, you don't want to name them, but what I'm saying is you do not have to have been a fighter or a practitioner, competitive, to be an official. Be a martial artist of some description, almost certainly, because MMA is so intricate, and if you don't or do not have a practical understanding of one or more of the elements, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, whatever it may be, you're going to struggle. You may get the odd anomaly, there's always a curve to the rule, but if you don't understand the sport, how are you going to know what you're looking at?
So I'm guessing, based on what you said just now, this applies to judging as well, more so even maybe than refereeing.
100%. Well, refereeing more so, but judging, even more, because if I don't know an arm bar from a Mars bar, or a dime bar, many people might not know what a Mars bar is. It's a chocolate bar, by the way. But if I do not know what I'm looking at, how can I assess it? And that's the problem. One of the problems that's facing MMA now. It's getting better. Don't listen to everybody that says it's not, because there's a lot of world-class judges out there now, and they're doing their bit to change the sport.
But even with a background in martial arts, you still have issues. Like you have in MMA, for instance, you just mentioned, there are a lot of the judges in the beginning, because of the 10-point must system, had a background in boxing, or they were boxing judges that came into MMA. Yeah. But we still see issues there, right? Yeah. So being one-dimensional when it comes to judging is also a problem. It's not even just not having experience whatsoever. It's just people who come from boxing and trying to look at just punches as points, and then when a takedown happens or some grappling happens, they don't get that. Do you see that often? Like, even I'm not targeting boxing judges. I even target like grappling judges. People who have backgrounds in grappling are going to be more biased towards people or grappling exchanges within a fight, right?
And that's true, because if you have a bias to, and this is when I talk about evolution, you know, the sport has evolved. You know, fighters evolve, coaches, trainers, everything evolves, and so do officials. Not everybody, you know, we're a young sport. MMA is still a young sport, so you'll still have a lot of the old guard will still be involved. You know, guys who have a particular single discipline, boxing, wrestling, whatever. Doesn't apply to everybody, but a lot of times, you know, subliminal in your mind, you may not think you're going to... It's an educational process as well. That's what it is, you know. And obviously what you're looking for now is well-balanced, educated MMA officials who understand the facets of the sport. It's not a boxing match. It's not a wrestling match. It's not a jiu-jitsu match. It's a fight. It's an MMA fight. And when you spoke about the 10-point must system, it's part of a thing, you know, educationally, people that say it doesn't work now, absolute rubbish, should we say.
I was going to ask you that question about what you thought about that.
Because here's the thing, okay, without getting into seminar mode, it's borrowed from boxing. Yes, the scoring system is borrowed from boxing, but it's a secondary action. MMA has its own criteria. A judge in MMA has his own criteria. So it's almost irrelevant what the point system is. Because if you and me watch a round of fighting and we have a difference of opinion because you're educated and I'm not so educated, the points that we give to a fighter are going to be different. You understand?
Yeah.
So whether it was a 10-point system, 50-point, half point, it doesn't matter. If you have a bias towards one facet of MMA and I'm the other way and we both don't know fully what we're looking at, the points in which you attribute are going to be different. And this is what people lose sight of, because they'll hear people say, you know, certain personalities that it doesn't work, but nobody's ever sat down and explained it to them. All the emphasis and all the education and all the time needs to be put on having judges look at the sport in the same way. Not like robots, because this is the thing. You're always going to have a difference of opinion. But as long as we have that difference of opinion, it's balanced. So that if we're on the same page before the fight begins, you know, you're going to give the fairest chance to these fighters. And that's when I talk about the evolution. Things are getting better all the time.
People already get confused with the 10-point must system. Explaining it to, you know, mainstream or casual fans of the sport is in and of itself a struggle. But people are talking about now, like I've heard Joe Rogan, I think, mention it several times about giving half points, like, you know, like it will get even more, like people are already confused with 10-8 rounds or 10-7 rounds, which are rarely given up until, I would say, 2 years ago. They started like really like giving 10-7, 10-8 rounds. Like they became...
Not so much 10-7s, the very rare 10-8s. There was a lot of, and this is the thing between, you know, getting down to the bare bones. You're talking about, you know, a judge. A judge is distinctly different from a referee. A judge, by definition, people talk about the new rules. A judge doesn't have rules. A referee has rules. A judge has criteria. They have a list of criteria in order of preference. And that's where all the education and there was more in-depth revision as to what... Well, you talk about a 10-8 round. And the reason being was because people were going out there, guys were getting steamrolled, you know, beat to within an inch of their being, and judges were still turning in rounds of 10-9, and in a 3-round fight, there's not enough difference there to be able to, you know, reward a guy or reward a potential winner. So there was more clarity offered, and there was more tools offered for the definition of a 10-8.
Who comes up with the criteria? I mean, it's a struggle having the MMA community come forward to, you know, present the document. So who does the criteria change for every region, for every commission? I mean, you know what I mean?
Now you're opening a can of worms.
Exactly. So.
Now you're opening a can of worms. In answer to your question, who does it? That we look towards the ABC, which is the Association of Boxing Commissions. But again, don't get thrown by the boxing. You know, the ABC is a collective group of, you know, we look towards the US because effectively, you know, that's where the ABC is in place. That's where the unified rules of our sport was derived from. You look back in the history of the sport, Jeff Blacknick, John McCarthy, etc., the guys who literally sat down and wrote the rule book. The ABC will have an annual conference every year, and this is where the changes to the rules or changes to the judging criteria are offered up. This is where it's debated and dissected, and this is where the state athletic commissions will choose to adopt the new revisions or not.
So these criteria, do they get distributed to countries with no commissions as well? Do you
Absolutely, yeah. But then you'll go to like we said, you know, you'll go to a country who may or may not follow the unified rules. You look at the Far East, you know, Pride was always different. You know, ONE FC have their own criteria. We're trying to get there to get, you know, more people in line. I want the sport to be common, you know, common in terms of its appearance and acceptance.
Okay. I really want to get even deeper into the discussion about commissions and stuff, but I'll leave it towards the end of our discussion. I want to talk about amateur MMA.
Okay.
Because in addition to your role as a referee, you are also the director of regulation now for IMMAF,
Yes.
right? Which is a kind of a full-time job now. You were a volunteer back before 2019 with them. Now
Yeah.
you're in an official capacity as a director of regulation. Before we talk about the regulation part, amateur MMA, which since the start of IMMAF or IMF, it became, you know, like grassroots movement when it comes to MMA, especially, I would say, in the region. We felt it more because of the relationship between Brave or the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Federation. Can you tell us more about the beginnings of the IMMA? If you were there since they hosted it in International Fight Week in Vegas, I believe.
Correct.
So can you tell us about the evolution of the IMMAF, their goals, and whether they have achieved their goals so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I almost sound terrible on this microphone.
No, I appreciate you coming in for to talk on a podcast with your current.
I felt clear outside. My sinuses are clear. It's like, you know, Sod's Law when you start talking and I start, you know, I must sound terrible. Yeah, I mean, IMMAF was born in Sweden, and it was the brainchild of August Wallen.
Yeah.
August has, you know, been around the sport for a long time. And he approached another chap over there called George Salfeld. But August was the brainchild of IMMAF, and that's where it came from. And I was fortunate enough to be approached in the early days, first and foremost, with the help of getting to help train officials. But yeah, I mean, my involvement with IMMAF, like was discussing in the car, it's something it's close to my heart, obviously, because it's about the growth of the sport, and the growth of the sport in the right way, which starts from the bottom up, from the ground up, and these young kids and these amateurs. And IMMAF has since taken off, and, you know, I think now we're close to 90, almost close to 100 member federations globally. The World Championships last year, you know, it was over 400 athletes. It's phenomenal, the growth of this sport at that level, and the level itself of these youngsters coming through. It's amazing. Last year we also had the youth categories for the first time. Children as young as 12 years of age, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, 17. And those kids blew me away. It's something that I'm very proud to be involved with, and long may it continue as well. And it's the push for, you know, they talk about Olympic recognition. Even I couldn't see it a few years ago. But the more you see the sport evolve, the more you come around to looking at, you know, keep that dream alive. But what we need to do is try and kind of preserve the integrity and the appearance, because we are a unique sport. It is ours, and we don't want it to change too much. But IMMAF is solely set out for the safe correct policy and procedure and platform for amateur fighters, and how can that not be good?
I don't know if you agree with me, but I watched quite a few, of the World Championships in Bahrain. I don't know, but it seems to me that at the amateur level, it's kind of, I wouldn't say more brutal, but it's very taxing on the body on a fighter than the professional level. Because on the professional level, you have 2 fights, 3 fights a year. With the World Championships, is it 4 fights a week?
5.
5 fights a week.
If you're in a full bracket, a 32-man bracket, you're going to fight 5 consecutive days. And yes, you're absolutely right. Like I said, the level and the, what these young kids subject themselves to is phenomenal. At a World Championships, if they're going to go from, day one to gold medal placing, they're going to fight 5 consecutive days. There may be a rest day in the middle, but yeah, it's unbelievable what they're doing to themselves.
So do you think because of that, the amateur system is the best way to get into the professional side of the sport, instead of having somebody who just, trains and gets straight into the professional side? Back in the day, I'm sure it wasn't the same in the UK. There wasn't an amateur system. Anyone with like a tough man or a strongman competition.
Half a background.
Exactly.
Anything.
He would get into professional MMA, right?
Yeah.
With Cage Rage at the time. So now you have that option of going the amateur route, making sure that doesn't get counted on your professional record. We saw Seb Eubank last night going into an exhibition fight, right?
Yeah.
And whether he won or lost, he won. That wouldn't count on his record. So people want to express, he comes from boxing royalty,
boxing,
and he's a
yeah.
professional boxer as well.
Yeah.
So he could have taken that fight and won that fight, a professional fight, right?
Yeah.
But some people choose to go that amateur route just to test themselves. And do you still feel like this is the right way to get into the sport?
100%. You touched on it there, was back in the day, we didn't have no amateurs, the platform just wasn't there. And this is a thing that's happened with MMA. You have young kids who have had 4 or 5 fights, maybe, as an amateur, and they think they got experience. No, you haven't. You look at boxing, boxers will have an amateur record into the hundreds of fights, literally. MMA, obviously, as things are growing, and this is what IMMAF does, where we didn't have the platform and opportunity before, now we do. IMMAF will have international opens, there'll be Oceania, there'll be the Asian, the Pan Americans, the Europeans, the World Championships. So the growth of the sport and the platform and the vehicle for these kids to have the amateur careers is getting bigger year by year, whereas before we didn't have that.
As the director of regulatory affairs, I'm sure you were responsible for establishing or helping establish some of those 100 federations you talked about as part of the IMMAF umbrella. But I want to talk about regulation or establishing these federations in those countries. Can you give me an example of a country that you helped, establish a federation there, or maybe a commission in that specific country more recently?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with where I come into it, as you rightfully said, is anything to do with regulation. So obviously you have member countries who, and this is primarily what we're trying to do. IMMAF, we're looking, like I said, it's a young sport, we're formative. We're trying to get the sport to look the same, because you look at our closest relative, boxing, whether you like it or not, it's our closest relative. Steeped in history, I don't need to speak the language, I don't need to understand what people are. If I turn the TV on in Australia, I know it's an amateur boxing match. Why? Because the guys are wearing a vest, and bigger head guards, bigger gloves, etc. Or turn the TV on in China, I know the same thing. MMA is still far away from that, very far away from that. The rule set for amateur MMA is even more fragmented than the professional side. But it's something that IMMAF have took on board, and I think the sport has changed more in the last 4 or 5 years than it has the last 20 combined. It's still going to take an incredible amount of work, and primarily that's IMMAF's fundamental, platform is it's about the safe implementation, progression, and everything that goes with it for amateur athletes, so that slowly but surely, as more countries come on board and they start adopting a single unified rule set, the sport starts to look and grow and become the same. And that's primarily what I'm looking to do. And obviously from my end, it's making sure that we do have a single unified rule set, so the sport can grow in tandem with its rules and its youngsters and its coaches, and everything gets the same. That's the end goal for me.
I read a very interesting article from Shaheen Shatti, or otherwise known as Sean Shatti from The Athletic. It was like probably one of the best reads I've read for a while, to be honest. I'll read some quotes on my phone here. So basically, the first one says, some countries have different rule sets or different classifications between what constitutes an amateur fight and a pro fight. And we've seen this in the region. We'll talk about that. And many countries still allow promoters to self-govern on the regulatory side of the game, which opens its own can of worms, which is also relevant to where we are today, right? And then it goes on to say, yet as technology grows more sophisticated, the falsified requests are getting increasingly elaborate. They're talking about record keeping or bookkeeping on some of the websites like Sherdog, Fight Finder, Topology, saying, meaning the war against malicious record keeping in MMA has never been fought on more fronts than it is today. This guy says, his name is Kelleher, he says, I've had guys specifically in the Middle East create false logos for athletic commissions in countries, write false letters to overturn results of fights, falsely sign them as false government officials to write in to have their records changed. So that's kind of the amount of subterfuge we deal with, he says. I don't know if you've been open to all of that, but as a director of regulation in the federation and a person who came and officiated in a number of countries in the Middle East, you mentioned the UAE, Bahrain, Lebanon, Jordan, Morocco, a lot of places with no commission. And if there was even a commission, it's a commission that's under a Jiu-Jitsu federation or something not completely, I would say, proper, But, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen some of these, what they talked about, some of these weird...
Yes, many times, over many years. Yeah, that's the like I said, it comes back to what I say. We're a young sport. We're 25, 26 years old. People don't like it when I say that. We're talking about it in the car with the UFC, the birth of the UFC. That's how people know MMA. I know when you go to Vale Tudo, etc. in Brazil. I know when you go to the Far East and Shuto and Panca, there is historical differences in the sport. I get all that. We give respect to that. You can't rewrite history. But in terms of getting that sport to and like you said there about countries with no commissions, look at the UK. My own home country has no. We're fighting and working all the time, but people don't understand the difference. In the UK, for the people who don't understand, in the UK you're free to do as you please. MMA isn't outlawed, boxing isn't outlawed, we have bare knuckle fights, we have everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. Then you'll go to other countries like Sweden, for instance, where MMA was outlawed but then became legal, and this was at the birth of IMMAF. So they had good jurisdiction. And then you look at France. France are in the best place out of any country in the world now because MMA is right on the cusp of being legalized.
In March, right? But that's another thing, though. It's going under the Boxing Federation, right?
Yeah, but it has to go somewhere.
Somewhere, because they can't be an independent organization
France are in the best place. And the reason they're in the best place is because MMA was outlawed, so they haven't got a track record of badness and poor things and this, that and the other. But they're about to stipulate and regulate MMA. The trick there is to make sure that we have the right people in the right place. And it's not all going to be plain sailing, but if you look at somewhere like the US, for instance, which is where we look to for obviously, our unification, there's still a lot of the old guard, involved that like you talk about in background of boxing, etc. And the stipulation and regulation in the US is by and large good, great. When you have an athletic commission, that's good for the sport. Good for the sport in terms of the regulation, the safety of the athletes, etc. But it can be bad in terms of, some of the old guard that's still involved who are not primarily or necessarily fully educated when it comes to MMA. You put that flip it on its side in France, where now we have some, and IMMAF has been instrumental, and the UFC. Nobody's lobbied harder and spent an incredible amount of money than the UFC to get MMA recognised in France. And it's going to be good for everybody. But I think France are in a really good place right now. And the trick now is just managing it and making sure that the right people at the right place and the right time are involved to present the sport as it should.
Let's say the UAE are ready to, come up with a commission or maybe a federation to protect the integrity of the sport. Because, this sport, anything bad happening in terms of a bad weight cut or, God forbid something really bad happens, it destroys the sport in this country, right? Because people will be like, whoa, this sport is dangerous.
Close the door.
Yeah, close the door on the sport. Let's say the UAE is ready to do this.
Uh-huh.
Marc Goddard, as a director of regulatory affairs in IMMAF and a guy with a lot of experience, what would you advise the UAE, let's say, decision makers to do first? Is it go the way of the federation, which takes a longer time, a lot of politics involved, or just go with a commission, or maybe a commission within a certain federation that's already established? What's your advice to?
It's kind of all of the above, but it's just about, like I said, it's about, we're still a small community as well. Let's make no bones about that. The sport's growing and everybody talks about this, that and the other. Yes, the sport is growing, but it's a small community, and no place more will you see that when it comes to things like regulation. Because what it's about is having the right people in the right place at the right time, and it's going to take years. I've been doing this I've been a referee for 16 years now, banging the same drum. It's constant evolution, constant education. And like I said, don't underestimate the work of IMMAF. Nobody has even come close to doing what we do and have done for the recognition of the amateur side of the sport. And the UFC, obviously being the global brand, the global entity that it is, has also, kind of had a huge impact on the world too. But yeah, I just think that, people you just can't lose sight of the fact that it's going to take time. You can't just, when you march into countries that have been doing things different, we're not necessarily saying all the time you're wrong, although a lot of the times they are, but like I said, you have to have respect for different cultures and different methods, etc. But in a nutshell, we'll just keep fighting the good fight, trying to let people see that the good people in the sport and the great, for me, I'm a pragmatic person, and the thing that I hammer home to people most is common sense, which unfortunately is not always so common. And look, people are always going to want to do their own thing, and there'll always be differences in sports. Not everybody wants to conform, and that's just human nature. But I think over time, you're going to see the sport be more aligned. And like I said, we can't underestimate the importance of the work of the IMMAF in doing that. And the UFC and Bellator and the UFC and Bellator, the great thing about those is they're still aligned to the same fashion in terms of the unified rules. If you come to the west, if you come to the east, you go to the Far East, you'll have one FC. Obviously, they do their own thing, their own way, which is fine, you know. But I just think that in time, may not even be in my lifetime, and then everybody will be wondering what the hell was Goddard shouting about. It's going to take a long. Don't underestimate how long it's going to take, but also don't underestimate how much has changed and the positive things that go with it.
Even after that, and what you said, I was really impressed with UAE Warriors and their self-commission, self-governance type of style, because I heard last night, I don't know if you're aware of it, but they pulled 2 guys because of medical issues, which shows me that, they're trying their best without a commission to make sure the sport is safe.
Yeah.
The main event was changed last night, obviously, because of the guy, Roman.
He was withdrawn medically.
So it shows me that people care about the sport, even if there is no rule of law, technically, with a commission. Promotions and maybe cities like Abu Dhabi, care about the sport too much and try to self-govern it the way the world does it. That's why they bring you, right? That's why they bring Blake Rice. That's why they try to bring the experts to run things. So it kind of gave me a temporary relief, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you feel the same way about that, that they're following, at least, even without a commission, the same steps that... okay, let's... we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you some like random questions about... random topics. First, let's start with, in football, especially like the English Premier League and maybe other leagues, there are, when managers criticize referees, they get in trouble, right? In MMA, your look says it all. We've had a history of Dana White destroying people like Steve Mazzagatti, who is nowhere to be seen anymore. We've seen more recently fighters, Colby Covington, kind of went off on you online. What do you? Do you see? Would you rather have that football mentality of do not, antagonize or criticize referees, or are you fine with that? And you're like, okay, this MMA is a fighting game, bring it on, just. Whatever.
Yes, both. It's kind of there's so many directions my brain is going in. I spoke before about my upbringing in martial arts and coming from a traditional martial art before I got into MMA, having the discipline and all the the integrity and the ethics that go with a martial art. MMA is, look, let's make no bones about it. It's a brutal sport. It's a fight. It's a legalized fight, And whilst, from a referee's perspective, this is where and I've fell foul of it before, because people will talk about, referees. Some people are of the belief that referees should be seen and not heard. Other fans and people of the sport say, referees are, you never explain yourself, that. I've tried to explain myself before. I've got in trouble. I've lost work. People accuse you of you want to be famous or you want the camera. And what is it, We're human beings. If you want a referee to be accessible, nobody don't ever have to tell me about upholding the integrity of this sport, because that's what I've done since if I'm going to speak publicly about the sport or about a particular situation, then you best believe I'm going to do it with integrity and professionalism and honour, and I've proved that time and time again. Like you just touched on there, and I did speak about that before, obviously the Colby Covington fight, in football, you do that to a referee publicly.
You get fined a good amount.
You're in serious danger, you're in trouble, Jose
Mourinho is one example of a guy that paid a lot of fines for
Yeah, for speaking about it. But when I said like he was being suggestive about referees, you know, people come out to us and downright abusers, you know. But look, it is what it is. I'm a big ugly boy. I can take it. But by the same token, yes, I do think something is missing in that respect because. Look, I'm the most vocal. Like I said, I believe I'm the most vocal and accessible referee. I've hung myself out publicly before. I didn't have to, and you know, if you can't admit to yourself that you're looking to evolve and looking to change and look at things differently, you're in a bad spot, you know. But like I said, I've spoke out before publicly and professionally, and I've got in trouble for it or I've been criticised. Then I've tried to speak out before about giving accessibility for explanation, and then people say that, you know, you should shut up and you should not be, you know, what do you want? What do you want us to do? Do you want us to explain ourselves? Do you want us to give an explanation? Or, you know, like I said, I think it comes down to the fact that you can't please everyone, you know, and I'm not going to change the way I am. If I think I can offer something, if I can offer some validity and offer some explanation and education as to why we do things, or in particular, I don't really want to talk about other referees. This is the thing, if I speak, I will speak publicly about something that was to do with me. I'm not in, people will ask me all the time about other refs, and you'll never point to on record where I've spoke publicly about it, because that's just not what you do, you know. Yeah, we could give an opinion here, there, but like I said, kind of what I said before, as a referee, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and you really can't win. And I'm just, you know, it is what it is, and I'll try and be accessible. I'll try and offer explanation where I can. Sometimes I'm limited. Sometimes it's not the thing that certain people want us to do. And I hope that makes sense.
There is a reward / punishment criteria for fighters. If they win, they get rewarded. If they lose, they get released, for instance, or whatever. Do you believe a reward / punishment criteria should apply to referees as well? If they mess up, they should be maybe banned for a few events or something, like some type of criteria that rewards and punishes referees. Because a lot of people say not a lot of referees who make mistakes get punished, like fighters do if they make mistakes. Like Paul Daly when he committed that Josh Koscheck, you know, when he hit him.
I mean, that's two extremes, obviously. You know, that's two. But obviously, look, this is the thing: the consequences of being a referee. You know, the magnitude is phenomenal. You know, like you said, I'm dealing with a fighter's career, this, that, and the other, and you know, you're dealing with livelihoods, championships, except, you know, at the highest level. You know, like you're saying, without dissecting it too much, you know, as a referee, getting into the complexities of why you make certain decisions at, you know, at the time, it's so intricate, you know, and at the same time it's so personal too. Like I said, I'm only going to speak for myself. I've publicly gone out there before and tried to offer a reason and explanation as to why. Most of the time it's well received, but some of the time it's ill received, and like I said, it's you can't please everybody. You know, you just can't.
And that's your opinion on fighters criticizing, which is a valid point. But what about keyboard warriors or people who let's say Stephen A. Smith, for instance, who criticizes. You had an issue with Stephen A. Smith, not because of what he said, but the choice of words that he used against a fighter like Cowboy Cerrone.
Yeah.
He mentioned cowardice, maybe, or some type of.
He was talking about quitting.
Yeah, something like that that you didn't like.
He was disgusted.
Yeah.
Here's the thing with the Stephen A. Smith thing. Obviously, it was what he said and how he said it. You know, Stephen A. Smith is a well-known sports personality in the US. Having him involved, that's good for the sport. We're not saying that. And obviously him and Joe had a little bit of back and forth. Then Stephen come out with his video and addressing the points about it. That's not what we're talking about, buddy. I'm not talking about the fact. Listen, I welcome you into our sport. I absolutely think it's good for the sport and the attention you'll bring. Nobody's talking about your open invitation to the sport. And the fact that what I also said was when he's saying, excuse me, I've done this, I've done that time served is not, that's not an automatic rite of passage. And this is where the video, because my mind, I'm so pragmatic, I'm like, everybody's diving on this, that, and I'm going, that's not what the issue was, Stephen. The issue was, it was the choice of words and how you said it. That's where people took offence, The fact that you were saying about, we didn't see much of Conor. Well, yeah, I agree with you. You didn't see, apart from a phenomenal performance. I understand why you said a fight that lasted 40 seconds, you didn't see much of a fighter. I can understand that point, but it was the choice of words that he used. We don't hear that much in fighting, and we certainly don't hear it about a guy like, Donald Cerrone, who's revered. The guy's broke many records, the bonus king, this, that, and the other. And that's where it went on this crazy tangent. Nobody's saying Stephen A. Smith covering MMA is bad. I'm not saying it's bad for the sport, but what I am saying is that there's a difference between critique and criticism. I think there is a distinct difference. And you're more than welcome to have your say. You're more than welcome to have your opinion, but it's how you have it. You understand, and I think that's where it got a little bit lost and a little bit convoluted, and you're going to have some people on this side, some on that side, and bring it on, bring him into the sport. I think it's good. I do think it's good, but let's not lose sight of that. I'm a very factual person, because I have to be as a referee. I'm talking about this happened, that. Nobody's saying your overall, like I said on my Twitter, I think when he was doing that video response to Joe, and he was offering, commentary as to, he was talking about the wrong thing, Nobody was questioning your opinion of not seeing enough of Conor. People were questioning your choice of words for Donald, and that was it.
You're a fan, obviously, as a person who lives in the UK. But you're Scottish, right? Or is it English? Or?
No, I was born in Scotland.
Scotland.
Yeah.
So, but the EPL, the English Premier League,
it's the best in the world.
It's the best in the world.
Yeah.
What's your who's the team?
My team is West Brom. So we're in the Championship right now. But my team is, I get it from my old man. But my team is West Brom, which is really weird because my oldest son is a Wolves fan, and they're like staunch rivals.
Yeah. That's interesting because usually the fathers make sure the sons follow in the footsteps of the father. But what happened there?
Well, obviously, from I took him to his first ever football game, but obviously, primarily, I'm in the fight world, combat sports, and I took him to his first football game as a very young boy, etc. But then his granddad, which is great, it's magical, he's sharing football. His granddad is a Wolves fan. My father-in-law, he's a Wolves fan, and he started going with him on a Saturday afternoon, blah, 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 blah. One thing led to another, and then he come home, Dad, I've got a season ticket for Wolves. What can I do to, I think at the age then...
You lost him.
Huh?
You lost him.
Yeah, that's it. I lost the battle. I lost the fight. But he's and he knows way more about, my eldest son is 16, and he knows... he knows much more about football than I do now.
What do you think this season? Liverpool done?
100%. And you know what? I'm so glad as well because they've never won the Premier League. Yeah, I just think
Champions League, but not Premier League.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be. Obviously, football is very divisive, especially in England. A team, there's people are going to hate the fact that they're. But for me, I think it's magical. I was sad for them last year when they lost out at the 11th hour. But I think it's a done deal now this year, and I'm really happy for Liverpool. And
it's a big gap. Let's see.
Klopp is phenomenal, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, even with Dortmund, he was like a beast. He was the only guy that went toe to toe with Bayern, in the German Bundesliga. So he's a legend now.
I mean, like I said, barring a unbelievable catastrophe, they've won the league, right?
Yeah.
Dare I say it? And that guy's going to be cemented in history as the first ever manager to win the Premier League with Liverpool, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Yeah,
let's see what happens. Even in the Champions League, they're still in it. So
still there as well. They're already the record British club for Champions League wins, and if they've done it again, blimey.
Yeah, I left the best for last. last night, Brexit, official. It's over, you know?
Yeah.
Britain is out of the European Union. How does that affect you as a...
You know what? Here's the thing. You know, whether they say don't talk about religion and politics. To be honest with you, I don't care. You know, I grew up in. I was always part of Europe. You know, we joined it was the European Economic EEC. It was the European Economic Community. I learned about that at school. I've always been part of Europe. We'll always be part of Europe. We're still, the continent hasn't changed. You know, we're still in the same continent. The fact that we're not part. And here's the thing I said about this is what, you know, it's divisive, isn't it? Very divisive politics. I was a Remainer. I wanted to remain. Did I vote? No. Why? Because what I'm saying is the fact that we're in or out, what discernible difference does it make to your livelihood? For me and my family, it really doesn't. I think it's much ado about nothing, and it will be forgot about. I understand that, you know, the contributions financially, and I think there was a lot of propaganda as well. I think it was driven in the wrong way in terms of, but look, there was a public referendum. And
twice, right? Or was it once?
No, once.
Once, yeah, okay.
There was a public referendum and it was razor thin, you know, and I think that the telling point here was, I think the biggest demographic of leave was 60 or 65 and above, which is kind of weird. It's almost like if it does have a significant change in years to come, those guys and girls, they ain't even going to be here.
I know the Scots weren't happy because they wanted to remain as well. So
yeah, I don't look. Like I said, the fact that I think if it start, you know, be careful what you wish for, because if it's trade wise, etc., you look at Switzerland and Norway. I think have never been part of that. They're thriving countries. You know, the fact that I think Britain is still regarded as the 5th largest. Look, none of the trade in, you know, who's not going to want to trade with the UK? I think where it might start to affect us is the free travel, you know, throughout Europe.
Yeah.
But that works both ways as well.
Work permits and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, work permits and free unrestricted travel, you know. And for me, travelling as much as I do, if I'm going to have to walk into another queue at airports and spend longer, you know what I mean? We're used to walking into European countries and just being treated as one of their own.
Now you'll be treated like us.
A bit, yeah. If I spend more time queuing, I'm going to be upset. But you know what? Look, live and let live, man. I don't see it having an effect, good or bad, on me or my family's immediate existence, and that's what's important to me.
I thank you very much for being here for almost an hour with us, or even more, a few minutes more. But always a pleasure talking to you. We talk a lot off camera, but you'll be back in a few days, and we'll hopefully catch up again during your next event.
Appreciate it.
Have a safe flight back.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.